Hello, everyone. My name is Philippe, as you know. Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Eden Talent. Today, our amazing guest is Jessica Lawson, um, which I've had the pleasure of meeting personally in LA a few months ago. But Eden Talent, as you know, is a series of interviews with builders, creators, innovators that often go unnoticed by you and by the general public for several reasons, because they prefer to build in silence and kind of let their achievements speak for them. But here we like to kind of bring them to light and kind of share their motivating stories. Like I said, today our guest is Jessica Lawson. Jessica is a Web3 content creator that started as a consultant at Deloitte and then moved on to COO role at Strange Loop Studios. And now she's the CEO and founder of Radia. Radia is the first multi-chain wallet for entertainment, and we'll go deeper on that later. Hi, Jessica. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And thank you for being on our podcast again, actually, because you've been a part, you had 5 minutes in one of our episodes where we kind of interviewed with quick interviews with Launch House founders. And yeah, now we're going kind of deeper on Radia and your story, because I'm sure a lot of people were curious after that episode. So, but for the ones that didn't listen to that episode, could you kind of give us a brief introduction of who you are and yeah, what you're doing now?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me, Philippe. So right now I'm building a company called Radia. It's the first multi-chain wallet for media entertainment. So, last year alone, there were 30 blockchains that NFTs were minted on. You typically need, one wallet per blockchain. There's some wallets that are multi-chain, but those wallets are very focused on coins, not NFTs. And they're also really focused on super crypto savvy consumers. I'm specifically targeting music, gaming, entertainment fans. Because if you think about the actions that get taken today, if you're the biggest Doja Cat fan in the world, you probably have like a signed vinyl, a signed t-shirt, a ticket stub, like all on a bookshelf somewhere. And there's no way to replicate that same experience. So ultimately, that's what we're building. My background, though, grew up in Tampa, Florida. Never saw snow or like experienced any kind of seasons until going to college at Georgetown in DC. So I was in DC for 9 years, four for college, and then five to work at consulting in Deloitte. And then went to work for my MBA. So spent 2 years in Philly. And then during the last year of my MBA, started working at a music tech startup called Spirit Bomb and Strange Loop Studios. Uh, we're the world's first virtual artist record label. So imagine Mickey Mouse becoming a pop star. We were creating, brand new artists. And that was also where I first got into NFTs. So we did a couple of NFTs with The Weeknd, which amassed $2.4 million, which is kind of wild. Did NFTs with the Glitch Mob, the White Stripes, and then did some with our own artists too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start, but I think kind of the first impression is a lot of things you usually don't see together in someone's kind of career journey in only one person. So on one side, I have
Yeah.
the MBA and Deloitte. On kind of other side, we have music and entertainment and all of that. And kind of in other kind of third bucket, you have TikTok and Web3 content. And these can kind of feel like three different people. And yeah, it will be interesting to understand how just one person can kind of balance
Totally.
do all these three different and seemingly unrelated stuff um, at the same time. But yeah,
100%.
let's start from the beginning. And here I even interest going a little bit before what we usually call our careers. Just kind of give us an idea of kind of your upbringing, kind of where you were born, um, things that you feel might be interesting, kind of leading up to kind of what then became your career.
Yeah. So I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and Tampa is a really interesting place where um, it's very multicultural, but it's very like new money. And so I grew up kind of like in a bit of a superficial environment. And my family was extremely like low economic. So, was always around people that had things that I didn't. Definitely like felt very insecure about that growing up. But I think that's where I really realized at a young age, I remember it so vividly, like freshman year in high school, I realized like the power that I had wasn't in being able to buy a bunch of stuff. It was instead of being able to like take control of my own destiny in the ways that I could. And so for me, I knew, I danced growing up, played the piano, and was a cheerleader in high school. And so I had a lot of extracurriculars and I started thinking about college. And so I knew that my parents would never be able to afford sending me to college. So at that point, I basically mapped out like, here are all the classes I would take. Here's how I would get a full ride to college. My freshman year, I kind of sat down and made that map and then was like, I'm going to be valedictorian. Like, I got to like check off all these boxes to get to where I want to be. And so started a club, which was a spirit club, was president of that, was captain of the cheerleading team, did become valedictorian with like the highest GPA in my high school's history, which was wild. Um, I like took 17 AP classes. Like I checked all the boxes, was able to get a full ride to Georgetown, which was awesome. But I think for me, I very much learned at a young age that like now that I look back at it, actually, it's a bit of manifestation. Like I literally sat down freshman year and mapped out here's the plan over the next 4 years. Here's how I'm going to do it, and I did it. And I look back on that a lot because I now feel like I'm very good at short term goals. I don't necessarily know if I believe in long term goals as much anymore because like you've already mentioned, my journey's changed so much. So part of me almost feels that the journey will take you along the way. But I reflect on that time a lot because I think it really made me into who I am today, but also exposing me to goal setting at like a really young age.
This podcast is sponsored by Talent Protocol, the Web3 professional network where anyone can invest in high potential talent.
And that's super interesting, and especially the connection between goal setting and manifestation, like you were saying. I mean, at Talent Protocol, that's actually a key feature that we have. I don't want to delve too much into that, but kind of the thing that's missing in our resumes is that they only focus on kind of past and present. This is where I've worked in the past, and this is where I am now, and never mentions the future. And of course, especially in the beginning, that's a good way of knowing someone. So, what are your goals? What do you plan to get there? And that's why we introduced that at Talent Protocol. And the thing we realized is that most people don't know who their goals are, and worse than that, they don't even know how to set them, how to define them. So it's something that most people don't do. That what you described, kind of setting a goal and then understanding what they need to do kind of to achieve those goals and turning that into a kind of a plan, a roadmap that they can follow. And yeah, it's great to hear how powerful it can be, because I think if more of us kind of did that or started doing um, that job of kind of trying to define goals early on and getting used to it. Of course, it's sometimes it's hard, like you're saying, it's hard to define a goal when you don't know what you want to do. But yeah, start small, something tangible for kind of next month, next week, and then you go from there. Tell us a bit more about kind of that relationship between goal setting and manifestation, and how kind of that affects kind of your day to day, and how that makes you much more likely to achieve the goals.
Yes. Today, I'm a lot more conscious of when I'm manifesting. I will say in the past, maybe up until 2 years ago, I didn't know what manifesting really was. So, in retrospect, I'd been manifesting without even realizing it. But now when I wake up every morning, I have this journal app where I write down 3 intentions of the day and then 1 affirmation manifestation. And so for me, it starts immediately in the morning. I think getting into a routine of manifesting is something that's really important because it's one thing to manifest once. I think it becomes more powerful when you're doing it on a reoccurring basis. And so for me, a lot of it right now is centered around content creation and then as well being a startup CEO. I think 90% of being a startup CEO or being a founder, and Philippe, let me know if you think similarly or think differently, is manifesting because it really is. Obviously, there's a lot of work. And don't get me wrong, it's an insane amount of work. But I really think that you have to believe you can do it. And until that clicks, I think people, it's just a whole different world. And so for me, I found that goal setting can be really important, but if it's not combined with the manifesting, and then it doesn't really transpire into anything for me personally. And I think that manifestation's all about like convincing yourself that you can do something. And being a founder, a lot of it is convincing yourself and then convincing other people that you can do something, right? And so if you don't believe it yourself, how can you possibly convince someone else?
Yeah, that's a kind of a great way to put it because kind of also believe in the power of manifestation, but it's nothing esoterical as some people might think. And yeah, I think you put it in a very clear way. So it's just kind of you go from setting a goal, then you have to convince yourself that you can achieve it. And if you truly believe that you will reach it, that will kind of transpire to others and we will be able to fundraise. You'll be able to hire talented people because they will also start believing in the same thing as you. So yes, much more kind of the energy that will come from you if you believe compared to the one that comes from you if you don't believe that you can reach your goals. So yeah, I like that definition of manifestation as the process of convincing yourself that you'll get there. And then yeah, a lot of stuff comes from that. But yeah, going back to your timeline. So what did that kind of time in high school? What was kind of the one of the biggest lessons or learnings about setting goals and kind of putting on the effort to achieving these goals? How did you feel when you kind of when you achieved those goals and got the scholarship you wanted?
It felt really, really good, for sure. And at that time, it definitely taught me to aspire for greatness. And I say that in quotes because I think that can mean something different to everyone. Um, and I think what's also really important is, I have 2 younger sisters who are gonna be in the same situation too. And so I also taught them how to set goals. And so, my middle sister went to Columbia on a full ride scholarship, and now my youngest sister's at Princeton on a full ride scholarship. And so, we all got very, very lucky, but also worked super hard. And I think that time taught me that working hard is what will get you to your goals. I will say that in more recent years, I've actually found that to no longer be true. I think working smart is now the way to go. That can sometimes mean working really, really hard. But I think that I had a really early experience with burnout, both in high school and in college, which taught me to remember to take time to rest, to relax, to recharge, but then also like your goals, like you have your goals, but also make them more manageable. Because I think that's something that I learned very early on is sometimes, you know, you can set goals that aren't realistic and setting realistic goals that have many touch points that give you doses of dopamine or serotonin as you achieve them will help you along the way.
Yeah, that's something that I mean it's common, especially on kind of ambitious people and overachievers to set super ambitious goals that they will likely not reach. And I kind of understand the thinking behind it. So you kind of set very, very ambitious goals, because even if you just reach half of that, kind of that saying, you aim for the stars and you might just reach the moon. but
100%.
but the thing is, like you're saying, the feeling and kind of what your body and mind will feel is that you'll never there. You're always working hard and you never reach kind of what you set out to do. Or this can kind of um, sometimes you can see it from a kind of a to-do list, a task list. You want to do everything this week and to do a lot of things, and then you just do half of it, and then you go to the weekend with that sense of not accomplishing or not doing enough or not doing what you should do. So yeah, I think that lesson of kind of breaking it down to smaller stuff to make sure you're not, yeah, um, not overachieve. Otherwise, it was interesting to know kind of how that kind of burnout experience was, and what does smart work mean to you today?
Yes, smart work to me today means I work from 8 to 5 and that's it. So as a startup founder, it's very typical, or I feel like the general consensus is founders are working 24/7, um, working around the clock, working on the weekends. I found that I'm just going to burn out. And, for me, setting those boundaries also gets my body into a rhythm. And so when it's 8 a.m., my body's ready to start working. My brain knows it's time to turn on. And then when it hits 5 p.m., I swear, like, I don't even need a clock. My body knows when it's 5 p.m. at this point, just by like where the sun is in my room. And then I stop working and close my laptop. Sometimes I may be doing like personal things later on my laptop, but I try to just like no electronics except my phone. And I'm probably on TikTok for a good hour or something during the evening. But I think setting those clear boundaries for me has been really important, but also maybe 2 years into my time at Deloitte, I became an early bird and kind of forced myself to become an early bird. So I was someone that was waking up at 5, working out at 6 a.m., and getting into that rhythm. And that's something that I picked up again post MBA. So I don't know if you remember, Philippe, it was like you, me, and Steven that were the early risers at Launch House. I'm just someone that I found the earlier I wake up in the day, the less I feel burned out actually, because I'm able to work, or I'm able to stop working at an earlier time too.
Yeah, I mean, that might not work for everyone, but what I feel is that having those boundaries, and I'm not saying I have them yet, but having them and working smart, is that probably those hours between 8 and 5 is where you are the most productive, and you do kind of 90% of the work. And then you need like 4 extra hours at night to do just the, the missing 10. So it's not a very good kind of, um, uh, yeah, batch. But tell me just kind of with kind of your burnout or almost burnout experiences, what were the signs, or kind of what made you realize that something was wrong or that you needed to change some things?
Yeah. For me, it was not being able to get out of bed and just dreading doing whatever I needed to do that day. And so for me, it was a lot of almost signs of depression. I think that's kind of like the classical signs. But I think for me, how I realized it was burnout and not depression was that once I started taking steps to more control work life, or, whenever I was in school and got burned out, doing more to control that, it would quickly go away. And so I also, went on a vacation that was like truly a vacation for the first time in my first year at Deloitte with my best friend. We went to Barcelona and didn't bring my laptop. And that's what I meant by like a true vacation was I wasn't doing any work, wasn't like reading anything for school. It was truly just time to relax and enjoy myself. And I never really had that before. And so for me, I also learned that getting out of my own environment too, was another way to help cope with that. So, like the first solution being kind of getting back into the swing of things or structuring my day differently. And then really taking time to go on a true vacation, whether that's like a day trip, like it doesn't have to be some sort of like expensive thing, right? It can be a day trip to somewhere outside of your city. Um, or it could be like a vacation in your city where you just like take the day and do fun things. But I think what's most important is like leaving your laptop at home, not opening your work email on your phone, and like really disconnecting.
Yeah, and that's something, of course, from knowing the difference between kind of European and US cultures. That's kind of vacation is something that's pretty different. So I would say that in Europe, it's much more common. Even kind of the overachievers and overworkers and startup founders do kind of take some vacation, and vacation kind of means kind of stepping away from stuff. Of course, nowadays it's much more difficult because you always have a phone around, but I mean, in the US, usually it is more difficult because it's not as kind of culturally ingrained to people that need of taking vacation. So yeah, it might could make things even worse. But yeah, thank you for the sharing both the smart work and the burnout signs. Um, and I'm sure that will be helpful to someone. What happened kind of during college and after college? When you started studying, did you already know kind of what kind of career you wanted, what kind of um, work you wanted to do?
Yeah. So I went into college wanting to be president. Obviously, no longer want to do that. And well, actually, I don't know if that's obvious or not, but to me, it's obvious. No longer want to be president of the US. I went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service. So Georgetown has four undergraduate colleges. One of them was set up in the early 1900s with the State Department in the US as a way to train future foreign service officers. And so, Bill Clinton and like a number of other like government officials went to that school. So I thought to myself, if it was good enough for Bill, it's good enough for me. And I wanted and I wanted to be a DC too, for that reason. I grew up watching 24 with my dad, and I'm not sure if you ever heard of that show or if anyone in the
I think.
podcast has, but it's basically a show about this guy, Jack, who's Kiefer Sutherland, and he is part of an intelligence community organization and fights terrorism and stuff. And so I saw that and knew that I really wanted to go into the international politics space. So studied international politics at Georgetown, really focused on Latin American trade law. So at the time, I knew Spanish and Portuguese. I've since lost it because I haven't used it. But studied abroad in Argentina for a summer, which was really fun. And what I wanted to do was go to law school, actually. So I started studying for the LSAT my third year of college, took it, did really well. But ultimately, I realized during my last year of undergrad that I am not the kind of person that likes to have their head in a book, or I feel like lawyers are looking for a needle in a haystack. That's not me. And I'm really thankful that I learned that really on because in my college friend group, I think 75% of people went to law school. And so I got to learn through them what the experience was like. And it's definitely not the right fit. For me, I think I realized my last year of undergrad that I really like working on teams, working in groups, um, working with other people that have different backgrounds, experiences, and mindsets than me. But I also really like talking. I love talking to people, whether that's, trying to convince someone of something and persuade them or trying to establish a partnership. And so I think those facts for me really solidified that going the law route wasn't the right route. So then I did the most natural thing for a college student was I then looked into banking and consulting. So I looked into the banking space because I thought for me, I wanted to walk away with either a deeper understanding of business or finance. because at the time, I was doing a certificate, which is essentially like a minor in international business. So started to get into that space. And that's also where I really learned about like working on teams for projects and stuff, because the program that I was doing that minor in, it was one third undergrads, one third MBA students, and one third graduate students. And so I was interacting with people that had already worked in consulting or worked in the business world within the MBA program and also in the grad program too. And so it was kind of through them that I even learned about what an MBA was. My mom got an MBA. She is now a teacher, so she doesn't really use it. But it was really through, going to networking events, um, talking like my classes for international business that I learned and got exposed to what the different sides of business could really be. Um, and so then my senior year ended up, I was deciding between like Goldman Sachs or Deloitte and end up going with Deloitte.
Hmm. Yeah. The- um, I'm interested in knowing more about kind of how kind of that corporate and traditional career kind of influenced the rest. But just want to point out one interesting thing, which is you're saying that you kind of learn after doing the LSAT that law was not for you. I was just thinking about other conversation and that, yeah, that it's okay to change your mind and it's okay to kind of kind of go one route and then realizing it's not for you. It's actually um, a good thing that you do it
Yep.
because that you kind of learn pretty early in life that what you didn't want to do, and then it made more clear what made sense to you. And sometimes I think people might probably be, yeah, don't want to change their minds because they think it's too late. Or for example, if you put like all that effort into doing the LSAT and studying for that's kind of the sunk cost bias. I don't want to spend a lot of time kind of talking about your career at Deloitte. Of course, share anything you think might be helpful, but more about kind of how important do you think it is kind of for what you're doing now? Do you think kind of having a more kind of corporate traditional career in those kinds of big institutions is important to kind of future founders? What can that teach you in kind of those early days of your career? Or if you went back nowadays, you would you go kind of straight to kind of the other companies that you worked for, or go straight into starting a company?
Yeah. I think for me, it was the right move because I didn't major in business. I got a minor in international business, but it wasn't exactly business strategy. It was more so about how do countries do business with each other, right? So for me, I didn't have a formal background in business, and going to Deloitte gave me that. I really learned how to solve problems in a structured manner, how to do good teamwork and be a good team member, and how to lead teams too. And so for me, I think it was the right approach. If there was one thing I could change, I probably would have left sooner and gone to either like a big tech company or a startup before going and getting my MBA actually. But at the same time, I stayed at Deloitte for so long because I was honestly like I had a goal. Like I told myself my first year at Deloitte, I want to go and get an MBA. Like that is the next milestone in my life. I'm going to work here for 3 to 5 years because Deloitte would have paid for my MBA if I had gone back to Deloitte. Um, and so for me, it was kind of like setting another goal. And in that case, I was very narrowly focused on this goal. But I think that if I'd had more exposure to people that worked in big tech or people that worked at startups, that would have been really helpful. And I think that's something too that looking back at my time and why I went to Deloitte was I had a lot of friends that went to Deloitte that were in grades above me or even in my year. And so it was kind of like all I really knew. Like my parents, I didn't really, you know, they weren't. people that were going to be giving me career advice per se. And so a lot of it was based on what I was exposed to. Um, but I guess to answer your question, I wouldn't change going to Deloitte. I would say that my recommendation for people that are looking into starting a company one day would be to find a role where you can learn a lot about how to solve problems in business, whether that's consulting, whether that's something at a big company. There's a lot of ways you could do that. But I think that skill set in particular really helped me become a founder today.
Yeah. Um, I agree. I agree that we can give you kind of the some of the bases that would be helpful. I mean, counter argument or being kind of devil's advocate could be that you start learning the things you don't want to repeat, so it makes it harder for you to innovate or kind of think from first principles in terms of how to kind of do in terms of governance, how to build the company, how to kind of culture building, what kind of culture do you want? But I mean, in the other hand, you might see things that you don't want to do, like with your careers. So I don't want this and this to work like this in my company. How was the jump from this more traditional role to the world of entertainment and music and Web3, which seems
Yeah.
kind of so far away from Deloitte?
Yeah, it was a big jump. Also, I was working with intelligence community clients, so like the NSA, CIA, and FBI at Deloitte. And so that was even a bigger jump. Um, so I would say the first thing that struck out to me was just the lack of resources being at a startup. So being at Deloitte, there's like an internal database, there's healthcare galore, all kinds of like, I had a corporate card where I could expense pretty much anything. And so going to a startup, like that was a big difference. However, I was ultimately looking for a role where I had a lot of responsibility. In consulting, I wanted to be the partner, which was going to take, another 10, 15 years if that even happened. And so for me, startups were really the only world that made sense after my MBA because I wanted so much responsibility and ability to actually truly own something. And so I luckily found, like, honestly, a lot of it was right time, right place. I found a company called Strange Loop Studios, and they have another company called Spirit Bomb. Um, that they were looking for head of business development. I had seen so they did Techstars Music Accelerator, which I also did this year. But they did it in 2020 when the pandemic hit. And so I had seen their like virtual demo day and had seen this in particular company do their pitch. And I remember the pitch like so vividly. And just the founder seemed so confident. And I really believed in what he was selling. And so a couple months went by and realized wanted to start working at a startup. So emailed him, and the day before they had posted like a head of business development role. So a lot of it was right time, right place. Um, and I was also joining the company as like the only business person in the company. Everyone else was a creative or an artist that were actually making the product. And so for me, it was really like the perfect role to really truly own the business side and to be able to lead that into fruition. And so I think I say this because there were a number of companies that I was thinking about reaching out to, or I was really scared, to be totally honest. I had no idea if anyone was going to respond. Um, I didn't know these people. I didn't have anything in common with them really. They weren't like Wharton or Georgetown alums. So they really had no reason to respond to me. But I think for me, I just kind of tried to write an email that if I were a founder, I would have wanted to hear. So focused on like why I thought the company was interesting, what I could provide, and like what value I thought I could help out with. And starting from there in regards of how can I help you versus, here's who I am, give me a job. Um, I think that was a lot more successful.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. But and what was kind of tell us about kind of the the challenges besides, of course, kind of not having all that structure behind kind of a startup, and also the exciting things about working with artists instead of the intelligence agencies.
Yeah. Well, so there's good and bad. So artists are a little bit more emotional about the product. So with the US intelligence agencies, you could say, hey, this is the right product decision because of the data, and they would accept that. But an artist, if you tell them, hey, this is the right decision because of the data, they're like, can I curse on here? I'm not going to. Okay. They'll be like, F the data, or just like, the data doesn't matter. This is what I think the art should be. So I had a really big challenge of taking an extremely creative organization from a company taking it from a company that does creative stuff to a business. And so the background was Strange Loop Studios for the last like 8-10 years has done music visuals for concerts, music videos, award shows for really like the biggest artists there are. So The Weeknd, Little Nas, Billie Eilish, Lizzo, go so on. And we're kind of, or yes, I'm not there anymore, but so they're kind of like the best that there is. And so you go from a world of these artists knowing they're the best to, this little MBA coming in and saying like the data's telling us this, we should be doing that. So I think that was a big challenge of figuring out, how do I as a business person persuade people in a way that I'm not really used to and they're not really used to. But once we kind of got through that jive, I think things started working very well. Um, that's the cool thing about working with artists, like they can make really cool stuff. Our products were super creative, super kick-ass, and really wowed people in a way that I think a lot of other companies aren't able to do. But I think the communication and culture around decision making was really crucial to set up at first.
Was it by this time that you got into Web3 as well, or was it before? How was the kind of
Yeah.
backstory?
So the one of the co-founders introduced me to Web3. So the chief creative officer, so the creative guy, um, is the one that introduced me to Web3. So I remember in my first convo with him ever, back in October 2020, yeah, he brought up NFTs. And that's when I learned, I'm like, what's an NFT? I remember, I think the second time I talked to him, I was like, NTF? Uh, like I couldn't remember the acronym. But then I started diving into it and learning a lot about it. And he started doing NFTs on his own in early January 2021. So really like right as the market was starting to exist. And I I just remember very distinctly being very against NFTs at first. I didn't understand them. I thought it was just a bunch of dudes behind their computers that were buying and trading stuff. I figured there was money laundering,
Yeah.
I thought all the negative things about them. I didn't see the value in it. But then once I started seeing utility come about and learning about,
Can you kind of try to do your best to explain an NFT to
yeah,
people that don't know what an NFT is? Because you're
yeah.
pretty good at kind of synthesizing stuff and simplifying it. So
Mhm. Yes. So the easy explanation I have for what's an NFT is it's essentially the way to make a digital object unique. So if you have, let me think of the right example because I don't want to give like an artwork as
yeah,
example
it's
because
like
everyone,
yeah, but it's like a certificate that's kind of you're the owner of the original one.
yeah, exactly. So like, let's say like your ID. So one day driver's license will be NFTs.
Mhm.
So imagine having basically your driver's license in a digital version, but you need a way for other people to verify it. Because of the blockchain, when you put your digital driver's license on the blockchain, it is now verifiable. And so I can then take it to different places and there's no question that it's fake or not. It's real.
And then that I am the owner of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yep.
a good example. Never, I usually use, of course, art or like you're buying a house, like
Yeah.
the kind of paper, the contract that proves you're the owner of the house, not the actual house, and that's the NFT. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
driver's license, a pretty good example as well. But yeah, I interrupted you, so now you can explain. Do you explain why you were bearish about NFTs and you didn't like them? Tell us now
Yes.
why you changed it.
So early 2021, didn't like them. Um, thought I thought all the typical bad things about them, the money laundering, the scams, it's a bunch of guys buying stuff, nothing wrong with guys buying stuff, but I figured it was like the 1% buying stuff, So there's a bunch of rich people buying art and evading taxes. But so then started to see the utility behind them. And also I started learning about other applications of them, like in healthcare or real estate or finance. And I think for me, that's what really opened up the world was understanding that 99% of NFTs today are trash. The 1% that aren't have the power to really radically transform our economy. And then also knowing that we've only really seen, 1 to 5% of the total use cases so far. And knowing those two things allowed me to really open up my imagination, but also realize what's happening today won't be the end all be all. And so I think from that point on, I was then able to get a lot more behind NFTs, but also like I'm very bullish on the future of NFTs, not necessarily like the current state per se, but what they can become.
Yeah, and especially if you look at them and all the potential use cases, not just art. Art will be just one of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that's and it's good to kind of to stress that probably 99% of NFT art today is kind of will be meaningless shortly. Doesn't mean that the technology behind it is also useless.
Yeah.
Um,
Or like the driver's license. Like I
yeah,
lost my driver's license at the airport in September when I was going on a flight. And so I remember thinking to myself, if only it was an NFT, I
yeah,
wouldn't have to worry about this. Things like that, or like passports or your healthcare record, being able to take it from one doctor to another and having that interoperability. I think the interoperability for me is really key too when we talk about the blockchain as like a huge,
yeah.
major use case.
The interoperability and the ownership of it. Because, for example, for your medical records, it could mean that you actually own your medical records and you can lend them to medical providers, to hospitals, to doctors, so they can access and consult them, but they're actually yours. Nowadays, your medical records are property of a number of different hospitals and kind of spread around.
Yep.
Of course, there's data and privacy policies, so they need to be careful and mindful of your personal data, but you don't actually own them. So yeah, I'm interested about all of that. Tell us how you got into NFTs, Web3, how that related to the music industry, and then that's when you kind of add an idea or kind of your own company. Tell us kind of walk us through kind of that process of having a good job, but then taking yet another jump to kind of start your own thing, and what was kind of your initial vision for Radia and what Radia is now.
Yeah. So the initial exposure I had to Web3 was through my last company and that chief creative officer. So he started doing NFTs back in January 2021. And then, kind of came around the curve of the mental gymnastics of don't like NFTs to, okay, I now understand them to I do like NFTs. I see the power in them. I see the future. And so that probably happened in April of 2021. So then just started trying to learn as much as possible. Got onto Twitter, which, there's you're aware, huge Web3 community. The two co-founders at my company were also really big into Web3 and NFTs. They were talking to folks really everywhere about it, and had a lot of connections to important people in the space. And so in July 2021, we did a show at Bright Moments Gallery. So if you've heard of like the Crypto Venetians, the Crypto Citizen, at PFP collection, Bright Moments was the first IRL NFT gallery in California on the West Coast in the US. And so we were their second show that they were ever doing at this gallery. And we basically made, if you imagine like Pokemon cards, we made the same thing with our artists. So like character cards. And I remember that was the first time I saw like the real power of community, especially in an in-person environment. So we had like Justin Beretta from the Glitch Mob DJing. We had like all our NFTs up on a wall, which was really cool to see. And so seeing a community members around that was also really exciting and really gave me a lot of hope for the future of Web3. And so, at the time I'd had 58,000 TikTok followers and thought to myself, I've learned so much over the past few months. And this is still very new. Like it still is today, right? Like no one's truly an expert because it's an entirely new domain. Everyone's a student right now. And so I started thinking to myself, okay, like how can I start sharing everything that I've learned in my experiences on TikTok? Because that's what I did previously is I talked a lot about business school, about business, what I was learning at Wharton and sharing that information too. And so then started posting about Web3 on TikTok. And I was like shocked by how many people were interested. The first video I ever posted about Web3 hit like 2.5 or maybe even like 3 million views in a week or so. And so then I knew I was onto something. Just continue to post content about Web3 and things that I thought were interesting, but also really focus on educational content. There's a ton of people on TikTok and social media that post about crypto and like to just kind of amplify their own bags. And so that's why for me, it was really important to come from a place of I'm not necessarily promoting a project. Instead, I'm promoting knowledge and education about the space. And then I basically put together a resource guide because I kept getting the same questions over and over and put together a doc with like over 250 links where people could go and learn about Web3 and everything I've read and listened to. And so I think for me, I really found a voice in trying to help curate information and give it to people. And I'm just lucky that and thankful that people were really responsive.
Yeah. So you started kind of your TikTok journey before kind of starting Radia, right?
Yep. So I started my TikTok on Christmas Day in 2020.
Mhm.
I actually started it because I was trying to learn about TikTok because I had identified that our target customer at my old startup was Gen Z. None of us were Gen Z and none of us knew anything about TikTok. So all of our content was animated and it takes a long time to make. So I just started posting content myself on my own TikTok with like assumptions or hypotheses that I had around what made good content, what wasn't good content, and started using my TikTok to kind of explore that way. And then my first video that I ever posted got 100,000 views. So I was like, okay, well, I'm onto something. So then just like kept posting. And then eventually it kind of turned less into an experiment and more of me just trying to help people.
Yeah, kind of. Now I'm divided on what to ask next, but let's kind of focus on radio first, and then we'll get back to TikTok. Tell us.
Yeah.
So, kind of you got deeper and deeper into Web3, into NFTs, and you start seeing how they could be useful for artists, and then kind of you decided to do your own thing, right? So, kind of,
Yep.
what was that decision process like, going from a job to starting something alone? And specifically in your case, you didn't have any co-founders, so it was more even a kind of riskier decision. So walk us through that process, and then what kind of your vision is for Radia today.
Yeah. So that was really scary for sure. Um, I going back to what I said earlier around I really wanted to be in the startup space because of the ownership that I could have. Back maybe in like my last 2 months at Spirit Bomb, I wasn't starting to feel that same sense of ownership anymore. And like I wanted more ownership. And I started to realize that the only way I'd be able to get more ownership was really if I was the founder or if I was the CEO. So for me, first off, I knew that I wanted more out of the role that I had. And the only real way to do that was to be the CEO. And so I knew that. Second off, I kept getting a lot of comments in my videos I post that were along the lines of don't understand NFTs, don't see the purpose in them, don't understand why people are buying overpriced JPEGs. Like you can't do anything. Like I got that comment so much is like, you can't do anything with these. Like, what's the point? And so I kept hearing this problem over and over. And I knew there was something to be solved around it. And so quit my job because I figured like I'm starting to get this platform. Like I hope it continues. And I know there's a problem here that I want to solve. And if I don't do something about it now, I'm never going to do it. Like I'm 29, I turned 30 in July. And for me, you know, I think a lot of it was, it almost felt like time was ticking, even though like the most successful entrepreneurs, according to studies, are like 42, 45. So, there's that. But felt like if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. Um, and so that's why I completely quit my job in December 2nd, remember it very vividly. And then applied to Launch House because I knew I needed structure. Like going back to the reason why the startup world was very different, it didn't have a lot of structure. And so for me, I needed structure and applied to Launch House to get some of that. Launch House isn't a super structured place, as you know, Philippe. But for folks that aren't familiar, it's basically a house. There's one in LA, one in New York, and I did the one in LA, which is where I met Philippe. But you live in a huge house with 20 other entrepreneurs for a month. And the magic of Launch House isn't necessarily in programming they do, because there isn't a lot of programming. It's not like you're going to school. The magic in Launch House is like the conversations you have in the kitchen or the conversations you have at night in the hot tub and just like asking people questions. Like I remember like you were helping me come up with my name, Philippe, uh, and helping me with branding. And so it's a lot of just for me, like that was a really great experience because it taught me a lot that I didn't know, especially since everyone else was a lot farther along in their journey than I was. And at the time, the concept of the company was very different than it is now. So we were going to be taking NFTs with commercialization rights and turning them into virtual artists. So very similar to what I did in my last role. Ultimately realized it wasn't scalable though. And so then I joined Techstars Music Accelerator, which that was like also serendipity. I knew I knew the guy that runs it, the managing director, Bob, previously from my last company. And I'd sort of called him in November before I quit my job and kind of just called him to chat and to talk about I might be leaving or like what are the options. And so got some advice from him then. They were starting a new accelerator at the end of January. And so I called him, or no, I texted him like January 10th and said, like, hey, I did it. I quit my job. I'm now living at Launch House. I'm building a company. Would love to chat. And so the next day we chatted. And the day that I texted him, they just had their like a company drop out. So there was one spot open in the accelerator that was going to start in 2 weeks. And so again, a lot of it was like right time, right place. Um, and so then I joined the accelerator and then spent the last like 3-4 months just doing in-depth customer development interviews with music companies, trying to figure out what's the problem to solve that I can solve too in Web3? And so that's, essentially like the story of how I, quit my job and started a
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. I think one interesting thing is that you're,
I can't.
mm,
Okay.
oh, yeah,
We're all good now.
you're mentioning mainly kind of the lucky moments, the kind of serendipity moments, how we got, for example, this one in Techstars. And I know people listening might think, of course, so you were very lucky. And of course, I'm not saying you were not, but we usually probably don't mention or forget about all of the things we tried that failed or didn't work. So of course you kind of reached out to Bob and then kind of worked out, but you probably reached out to a lot of other people that kind of didn't turn out into nothing. So what my question is, it's probably for you to have kind of those serendipity moments. You probably need to try a lot of them, and some of them will work, and some of them will not. Or do you think in your case was very kind of lucky in kind of you waiting, or was it more kind of the manifestation thing? Kind of you waiting for one thing, and then just by one thing and trying really hard to get it, or kind of you trying several things and then some kind of paths uh, uh, show themselves to you?
Yeah. For me, I didn't even think joining Techstars was possible. Like I didn't know that someone had just dropped out. So when I texted Bob, it was really just to chat and catch up. And then he brought up on the call, like they have a spot open. And so in that case, I wasn't really thinking about doing an accelerator. So I wasn't talking to really anyone. I think in that case, it really was right time, right place. But what I will say is that I had already built up trust and a reputation with him, right? So I do think like that relationship that I had was really key because he wasn't just going to let anyone in to Techstars, right? Oh, whoops. Just got really loud. Sorry. Uh, I was able to do that because he knew me personally, he knew me professionally, and he had seen my work. And so I think in that case, I think what I learned from that actually was like keeping people up to date with what you're doing is
Mhm.
really important. And whether that's leveraging social media or doing monthly outreach to people that you want to stay in contact with, if I hadn't have texted him, it would have never have happened. Right. And so I think that's what I learned from that was stay in touch with people.
Yeah.
Um, don't forget about anyone because not only is there a chance that they could help you, but you could also help them. Like this is not a one-way street, right? It
Yeah.
should always be a two-way street, if not like
I-
multiple streets.
In most
Yeah.
cases, can help people without any effort from your side. So I think the magic here is finding those kind of overlaps and kind of things that you know and can give that other people need. And yeah, for that to happen, you need to be visible and to put yourself out there. So kind of finding your way to do that in kind of a way that's authentic to you. So if you're not a social media person that that likes to do stories every day, maybe find another another way. But yeah, keeping people up to date because some of and I mean in my case it's the same. Most of those lucky moments come from unexpected places. So going and yeah, just showing interest in most cases, it's maybe if you asking how the other person is doing, asking them to keep you updated, and then they'll get updated on you as well. So that might be good advice. So kind of to kind of close the chapter on radio, tell us a bit because then you had one idea and then Techstars. During Techstars, you kind of um, went looking for the to clarify the problem that you're solving, kind of identifying, talking to people in the music industry to identify what was the pain point that you could address, and tell us kind of what pain point did you uh, find, and kind of how Radia proposes to kind of to solve that in the future or today.
Yeah. So through my TikTok and talking to fans, of music and gaming, etc., I'd learned that there's a really real problem around what can we do with NFTs? What's the point of them? What's the utility, right? And how do we actually add utility to that? And then by talking to record labels like Universal Music, Warner Music, Sony Music, and huge music companies like Amazon Music or Spotify, I learned there's two big problems right now in Web3 with music. Is number one, these companies don't know what to do with in Web3 yet. Um, they're watching a lot of independent artists experiment, keeping a close eye on what fans like, what fans don't like, but they're still really figuring out what should they be doing in Web3. Some are more advanced at it than others. Like, for example, like Spotify, I think last week just announced they're going to allow artists to now not allow for like a marketplace, like buying and selling NFTs, but allow artists to post that here are my NFTs that I have on my Spotify profile. Um, the second problem I learned about was they don't have the right infrastructure set up to support NFTs. So most of these record labels don't have a corporate wallet. So if an artist like The Weeknd does an NFT, it's going from his personal wallet, which imagine if you're selling something for work from your personal bank account. Like that's a huge no red flag today. Right. And so I saw there was this huge need to actually really like bridge the worlds of Web 2 and Web 3 together. I believe in Web 2.5. I think Web 3 um, in its truest form, I don't know if that will ever happen, but I do think that like Web 2.5, Web 2.75 is probably very realistic, where there's like a centralized user experience. The underlying technology could be decentralized. And so that's what the record labels want, is like this like centralized world to continue. So essentially what I realized was, you know, I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the call, in the beginning of the podcast, that there were 30 NFTs, or excuse me, 30 blockchains that NFTs were minted on last year. So there's a lot of like horizontal friction with wallets. And then additionally, artists will launch a new wallet each time they will do a drop, especially if they're worried about security, or if like they're just worried about it like mixing money together. I want to be separate. And so then there's like vertical friction too. So there could be a case where Warner Music's managing, 10, 20 wallets per an artist, which sounds like a nightmare. And so what I realized was building one centralized view of an entire record label's roster is really key. They want to see everything in US dollars. They want to see everything in one place. They don't want to have to use Etherscan. Like, can you imagine like if, I don't know, someone that works in classic accounting,
Yeah.
going to Etherscan, trying to find like it's just yeah, it's a nightmare. Um, and so realize like that centralized UX is what these labels want. But on the flip side, I think the world will also be multi-chain, and they're not prepared for that either. So giving these companies one place to view everything, but then also providing um, fans one place to view everything as well was like really key.
Yeah, it sounds, sounds both much needed and also a huge task that I'm sure kind of breaking it down into kind of smaller um, steps. But yeah, where can people kind of stay updated about Radia? Like we were mentioning, how can they kind of follow your journey or help out if they can, or just kind of be updated?
Yeah. So you can go and join our waitlist at radia.world. And then you can also follow us on Twitter at radia_world. And then my socials on TikTok are Jessica E. Lawson. And then on Twitter, Jessica Lawson 92. I'm trying to figure out how to
Mhm.
make that easier, but one
But
thing at a
and
time.
what would you say kind of is the kind of your biggest challenges or the stuff that you would need help with at Radia?
Yes. So right now I am actively searching for a technical co-founder, founding engineer. feels like dating again, which is always fun. So that's what I'm looking for the most is someone, it's either like a Web3 developer who's worked at a wallet company before, or a Web2 developer that's worked in fintech. So like a PayPal or a Stripe, someone that's like really excited about Web3, maybe hasn't had a chance to work in it yet, but really wants to be in that space.
Sounds, yeah, very, very specific. One thing that, of course, comes to mind, and I've been talking and interviewing a lot of people in Web3, a lot of people in the startup world, and both, I mean, in these worlds, Web3 startup, and even kind of the corporate world you were briefly a part of. It's unfortunately not very common yet to see um, women in kind of these leading roles, and kind of how did you feel kind of going through all these steps without seeing that many kind of references, kind of people that you could kind of aspire to be, and yeah, how did that shape your journey? Did you make you kind of more stronger? Kind of how did it affect you? Because I mean, in my case, I can cannot even know how that feels, because of course, by being a white male, I can see people like me everywhere. So yeah, I was curious to know kind of how you feel about that.
Yeah, I've been experiencing that basically my whole life. And so it doesn't necessarily feel different. What does feel different is, well, actually, I'd say, so when I was working with the US intelligence community, I was frequently like the only woman, the only person of color, like the only queer person. Like I was frequently always the other. And at the time, I didn't really talk about it. Now, I think what's different is I'm willing to talk about it. I walk into a room, I might be the only, one of all those things there too, but it feels less like I'm an other. I will say I found the Web3 community to be pretty inclusive, which has been nice. Um, Talking to VCs and investors, a little bit different, right? Where I'm being very pushed to get a technical co-founder right now. Whereas like there could be a guy somewhere that has the same qualification as me, but gets funding because people believe in him, or there's a lot of, unconscious bias there, for example. So that's something that I think about actually. But also like women in Web3 have gotten less than 1% of funding, which is wild. So to me, that can be really daunting. Um, but I think that's where talking to as many people as possible is really important, but also finding really great mentors. I think like my worst fear is that my cap table is all men. Um, which like nothing wrong with guys. Like I want to be very clear. Because I know I said earlier, like a bunch of like, old guys buying NFTs, like nothing wrong with guys. Uh, I think what's important to me is that the cap table like reflects who I am, right? And the types of advice that I want to get. And so I found like I've started to really intentionally focus on finding angels that look like me, that have similar identity and background to me, as well as like mentors too. So there's someone like Danielle Gorman who works at AWS. Like she's absolutely amazing. She's someone I met through Techstars. And she's honestly been like a super connector for me, just always trying to help me and help me meet people, which has been really awesome. And so finding folks like her has been like my biggest, well, aside from finding a technical co-founder, my second biggest priority.
Yeah, I think thank you for sharing that. I do feel the same, that in Web3 it's a pretty more inclusive community. Doesn't mean there's representation of kind of different kind of perspectives, different backgrounds, but it's probably more accepting. But yeah, but most funding, like you're saying, still come from the people with money. So they're still the same. So there's the same unconscious bias is there. So what do you think we could do? We could do, I mean, as a community, now it's focusing on the Web3 one, we could do kind of to make sure that Web3 doesn't end up looking like Web2 in terms of representation and diversity?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of education
Mhm.
and educating people in new ways and in different channels that might not typically get the education.
Yeah, and you're doing your part by educating people on TikTok, and thank you for that. And as just a final question, kind of to close our conversation, let's look a little bit into the future. How do you think your your future will unfold, both in terms of Radia and kind of personally? How do you think 2023 will look like? And yeah, just kind of some wishes, or yeah, let's do like a manifestation uh,
Yeah.
part of the podcast. Tell us, what do you want to achieve?
Wow. I haven't actually thought about this. I've been, I have kind of like stopped setting long term goals, but this is even though it feels like a year away and that's it. But what I would like to achieve is, I mean, number one, find a technical co-founder and find like someone that I'm really, really excited about is the right fit and that we work super well together. That's key. Second, raise a pre-seed round. Third, what I'd actually like to do is to not have to take a salary and to be able to support myself from content creation alone. Um, so if anyone wants to sponsor a video, let a girl know. Uh, and then I really hope my dog likes her life. That's something I always think about is I try to make every day something special for her because she's my child right now. I'm a childless millennial. So my dog's my life. And I really hope in a year from now, I continue to have a life in LA that I'm really thankful for and just surrounded by joy.
Well, I hope all of those will come true soon, and yeah, hopefully I can see you in person soon and kind of share some of that good energy and good vibes and joy, and spend the day with Celine as well. Enjoy life like
Yeah.
she does. Man,
Yeah.
thanks, Jessica, so much for all kind of your insights and all that you shared today, and yeah, for spending your time with us. We appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Talent Protocol, the Web3 professional network where anyone can invest in high potential talent.